What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka Nightblade. So the Magicka Nightblade used to be one of the strongest Magicka DPS in the game. However, a couple of nerfs, a couple of patches later, the Magicka Nightblade is not quite as strong as it used to be. The Nightblade is still a really good DPS class. One of its biggest strengths is the fact that one of its spam its class spam does also act as a really strong self-heal, basically giving you some pretty decent survivability, which is really awesome for things like progression style guilds or in situations where you're anticipating high damage. But in general, there are a few classes in the game right now that do outstrip Magicka Nightblades as a DPS class. In addition, Magicka Nightblades also have one of the hardest rotations to master. That being said, though, it doesn't really give you that much if you do master the rotation. Again, because of a lot of nerfs that have happened, it's not really all that great, but Magicka Nightblades in general have the best sustain out of all the different Magicka classes. And again, their class spammable is a really decent self-heal, so I really enjoy playing the Magicka Nightblade in a sort of progression style guild and progression style content where I'm able to play a Magicka DPS. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. We'll talk a little bit behind the rotation. We do have swapped out quite a few skills here, added in a few other ones, mainly due to the changes in single target damage over time abilities. So we'll be talking about the rotation a little bit, and then we'll close things off with a 21 million dummy par so you guys can get an idea of just how strong a Magicka Nightblade is compared to other classes. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So this is just one of potential other setups here. So in terms of Monster Helm, we're running Zaan's. Still the strongest Monster Helm set in the game right now for Magicka DPS, no surprise there. There really haven't been any sort of new Monster Helm sets that have been introduced that really outstrip Zaan. That being said, you do want to have a couple of the options on hand just in case you aren't able to be within that melee range in order to really take advantage of Zaan. So going through all the different Monster Helm sets first, kind of in order here. So the first thing I do want to mention here is that Zaan is a DLC Monster Helm set. You do need to finish Scalebreaker, Scalecaller Peak in order to get Zaan. So if you don't have access to Scalecaller Peak, the next best option would be Grothar if you're able to be within melee range. The advantage of Grothar is that while it does end up losing out in single target DPS, it actually does have a really nice AoE effect. So for things like trash pulls, Grothar will beat out Zaan there. Zaan is strictly a single target set here. Moving on, I do want to give a shout out to Iceheart, which is a really great set for progression style guilds. The damage itself is not particularly strong, but you're not really using it for the damage, you're using it for the damage shield that it provides. 8600 damage shield is not something to turn your nose up against. So for if you are a Magicka DPS and you're in a progression guild, do consider picking up Iceheart. The additional damage is always nice, but the damage shield is what really sells Iceheart, at least for me, in a progression style guild. In addition, Iceheart is one of the few Monster Helm pieces with a 1-piece spell crit bonus, which is going to be pretty strong if you need to play at ranged. The next set I want to talk about is going to be Slimecraw. So Slimecraw is a fairly decent set if you're in a situation where you're not going to get Minor Berserk. So for those guys who've kind of been just catching up with the game, Minor Berserk is no longer part of your bow proc anymore, so you will need to rely on your healers to give you Minor Berserk. So in those situations where your healers might not be able to get very good Minor Berserk uptime, Slimecraw is a great set to hold on to here. And very similar to Iceheart, the one piece is one of the few pieces that give you a spell crit bonus, so always nice to have for range as a ranged option. Moving on from there, the last Monster Helm set I want to talk about is going to be Valkyn's Skoria. So it's not quite as strong as the other Monster Helm sets, mainly because the one piece does not provide any sort of additional DPS, it's just plain old max health. The two piece itself is not particularly strong compared to other Monster Helm sets in the game in terms of overall DPS that it's able to do, but it is good for survivability, so that max health does provide a little bit of additional cushion room in terms of your overall health. It's just you are going to be lacking some DPS, but it is one of the only Monster Helm sets that you can use at range on the Magicka DPS. The other option, if you don't want to run Valkyrie Skoria and you want to maximize your overall DPS, would be to run 2 different Monster Helm sets with 1-piece spell crits. So that would be something like 1-piece Zaan and 1-piece Iceheart, 1-piece Slimecraw, 1-piece Iceheart, and so on. The 2 additional spell crit bonuses that you're getting will be fairly strong bonus. At the very least, it usually will out DPS Valkyrie Skoria. So that is your Monster Helm set options. Moving on from there, we do have one really powerful set. I should say this particularly strong setup here is going to be Mother Sorrow on the bodies. So this is any combination of your armor piece or your jewelry piece. So I have a couple of armor pieces and a couple of jewelry pieces here. And then for our second set, we're going with Siroria. So Siroria is actually going to be a front bar set on this build. I did play around a little bit with Siroria on the front bar compared to the back bar, and I did find that Siroria actually isn't terrible on the front bar. Still comes with its natural weaknesses, mainly that it's not particularly great on mobile fights. At least there are other sets that can at the very least match Siroria on mobile fights. And if you are in situations where you might be stuck on the back bar, or you might not necessarily be able to get that Siroria proc right away because of periods of vulnerability, you can't hit the boss, you can't hit anything, Siroria does lose quite a bit of damage there. You still maintain that spell damage bonus when you're on your back bar with Siroria, but it's mainly the fact that you do run the risk of dropping all of your stacks if you're running Siroria as a front bar set. In terms of traits and enchants here, for your armor pieces, you should go with all divines with all max Magicka enchants. You can go with infused on your large pieces if you so desire. It's kind of up to you which sort of set pieces you happen to drop first. For jewelry, all Bloodthirsty with all spell damage enchants here. For our front bar, you can go with Precise or Infused as your weapon trait. The higher your DPS is, the stronger Precise becomes. So if you're just starting to get into DPS and you're only able to pull maybe like 40-45k, I'd probably say stick with Infused, but as you get stronger and you're able to hit those 75-80ks, that's when you kind of want to swap over to Precise. The cutoff is somewhere around 55-60k or so, a single target DPS. For enchant, it's going to be a flame damage enchant no matter what your trait is. And for the back bar, we have the Maelstrom Inferno staff infused with one of 2 possible enchants. You can do shock damage for more single target, or a weapon damage enchant. It's kind of up to you how you want to play around with that. I'm actually going to swap this out for a weapon damage enchant here, as I generally prefer the weapon damage enchant over the shock damage enchant. Now, in terms of other sets that you're going to want to hold on to, because Siroria obviously does have its weaknesses, you definitely want to try to keep Mother Sorrow as one of your sets. The Shadow Mundus meta, this sort of crit damage meta, really emphasizes additional crit chance, so Mother Sorrow is definitely a set you want to have on hand, regardless of whether that's on your body set or as a front bar set. But there are a few sets that you can consider using in place of Siroria. So, starting off first with the Cyrodiil set here, Spell Strategist, a pretty strong single target set, not very great for AoE because it does apply a debuff on whatever you hit with a light attack, but it is one of the strongest single target sets in the game, with giving you a very hefty boost to your overall spell damage. This comes from rewards for the Worthless, so you can either buy it off guild traders or you can go into Cyrodiil and try to farm this yourself. But moving on to dungeon sets here, there are a handful of light armor sets that you can pick up as a Magicka DPS here. First one is going to be Burning Spellweave, a classic set here from City of Ash. Very good as a front bar set because it is a proc, so it will carry over to your back bar. When you deal damage to the flame damage ability, you have a chance to apply the burning status effect, which is unique from the burning status effect from you running like a flame damage enchant, and you increase your spell damage by 525 for 8 seconds, once every 12 seconds. So overall, really good set here, body or front bar set. It's a base game set, and if you don't want to necessarily run through bosses, you can of course just chest farm in City of Ash 1 to try to get your weapons, but this is a little bit of a pain in the ass to farm the weapons for at the very least if you're going for a front bar set with Burning Spellweave. But moving on from there, one other set that you might want to consider picking up, less as a damage set, more as a support set, would be Zen's Redress. This comes from the new dungeons that just came out, Lair of Marsalok. So your light attacks apply a debuff known as Touch of Zen to enemies for 20 seconds. Enemies with Touch of Zen take an additional 1% more damage for each damage over time effect you have placed on them, up to 5%. So this is very much more of a support role because this is a debuff on the enemy, and so everybody in your team benefits from the additional up to 5% damage taken debuff. As a Magicka DPS, you will be able to hit the 5% debuff, so you have, for example, Flame Reach, Crippling Grasp, Soul Trap, Entropy. At the very least, you'll definitely be able to get up to 4. 5 is potentially not feasible on a Magicka Nightblade, depending on whether you're running Scalding Rune or not. But you can at the very least get 4% additional damage taken debuff when you're wearing this set. So still a pretty strong support set. Even if you're not able to get all the way up to 5, you should be able to get at the very least up to 4%. At the very least with this build. If you decide to add in Scalding Rune, you can potentially reach up to that 5% uptime. In terms of overland sets, there's a handful of overland sets that you can grab. Not that many though. The first one's going to be Spinner's Garments. So this is a base game set from Valuable Tor. Just gives you additional spell penetration. Pretty strong for trash, but not that great for single target boss DPS. Mainly because your debuffs will be on the boss, so you don't necessarily need additional penetration from Spinners. Moving on from there. Other than that, I don't think there's that many light overland sets. You can go with Crafty Elfique in a pinch. This just basically gives you a ton of max magicka. It comes from elsewhere, but it is an overland set, so you can buy it off of guild traders. But Crafty Elfique does end up losing out to Mother's Sorrow. The spell crit is just significantly stronger than max magicka on a Magicka DPS. Finally, there is light trial sets, 2 of them that I would like to point out here. First one is going to be Master Architect. So Magicka Nightblades do have a fairly cheap ultimate in Soul Harvest, which costs only 70 ultimate, so pretty cheap, and so it goes very well with Master Architect here. If you do decide to use it as a front bar set, because you can put it on either bar here, you will need to make sure to use your ultimate on the appropriate bar. If you are running this as a body set, it doesn't really matter which bar you activate your ultimate on, but as a front bar set, you do need to be mindful of when you're using Soul Harvest, what bar you're using it on. This comes from Halls of Fabrication, so we'll need to have access to the Vardenfell DLC, or expansion I should say, in order to farm for this set. And the next set is going to be Perfected False God's Devotion, which comes from the Sunspire trial in Elsewhere. This is a fairly decent set, mainly because it gives you the Minor Slayer, plus it has a ton of additional armor bonuses. I have a total of 4 additional armor bonuses with the perfected version here. So really strong overall. The cost reduction is just additional icing on the cake, just makes it fairly easy to sustain a light attack rotation on a Nightblade. Nightblades, generally speaking, you will not need to get False God's Devotion to fully sustain a light attack rotation, as you'll see with the 21 million dummy parse. But the additional sustain is always nice, especially if you're just starting to learn the Magicka Nightblade rotation and you're not 100% comfortable with the rotation yet and you're having sustain issues. But those are all the sets that you could wear on a Magicka Nightblade. If we go into our character sheet, I am a Dark Elf. Dark Elves are going to be one of the stronger races for Magicka DPS in general. The strongest race, mathematically speaking, would be the High Elves, because they get 2000 max Magicka, on top of 258 additional spell damage. Dark Elves don't get quite as much max Magicka, they get 1875 max Magicka and 258 spell damage, but Dark Elves are probably the best if you also want to play Stamina DPS on the side, you know, maybe flip-flop between the 2 of them, because Dark Elves do get the same bonuses for Stamina and weapon damage as well, so 1875 max Stamina and 258 additional weapon damage. Beyond that, you can go with Bretons if you'd like. They get 2000 max Magicka, 100 Magicka regen, and 7% cost reduction to all Magicka abilities. So you do lose out on additional spell damage, so your overall DPS ceiling will end up being lower on a Breton, but your sustain will definitely be through the roof. It's very, very easy to sustain a Magicka DPS as a Breton. Finally, if you do want to kind of go for a jack of all trades race, for example, if you think you might want to maybe do tanking later on or maybe healing, then Khajiits are a pretty decent option there as kind of a jack of all trades, master of none race. 875 across Magicka health and stamina for all 3. They get 85 Magicka and stamina regen, 100 health regen, and they get 10% additional critical healing done and critical damage done. So again, very similarly to the Bretons, you are losing out on the spell damage bonus. You're gaining some of it back with the 10% additional critical damage done, but generally speaking, the Khajiit's DPS ceiling is going to be lower than a Dark Elf or a High Elf in terms of your overall maximum DPS potential. In terms of attributes, we have all points into Magicka. We are running blue food, so we do not need any points into health. If you are having trouble sustaining, you could use Clockwork Switch's Fillet, in which case you might need to put some points into health, but you can also make up that health by running a small health enchant on one of your armor bases, for example. So kind of up to you how you want to play around with that. In terms of Mundus, still sticking with the Shadow. Nothing has changed with Mundus Stone, so we're still sticking with the strongest Mundus, which is the Shadow. And then I already talked about this before, but we are using blue food. So this is the base game blue food of max health and max Magicka. Nightblades do have some of the best sustain moves in the game, so you don't necessarily need to run Clockwork Switch's Fillet in order to fully sustain a light attack rotation. If you do want a little bit more regen, you can also be a vampire. At stage 2 vampirism, you get 10% Magicka and stamina regen, but in return for that additional regen, you do end up taking more fire damage as well. So that's the trade-off that you make. If you want to be a vampire, you get a little bit more sustain, but you take some more damage from fire damage. So you kind of have to balance that out, see whether or not that is appropriate for you and the kind of playstyle that you go for. Generally speaking, most DPS do run vampire just with additional regen because it's always nice to have that, but not all DPS choose to do so. Moving on to our skill of bars here. Starting off with the front bar, we have Impale, Swallow Soul, Flame Reach, Merciless Resolve, Crippling Grasp, and Soul Harvest. If you don't want to run Swallow Soul, you can also run the Sigil Order ability Elemental Weapon if you'd like. I personally prefer Swallow Soul because of the additional heal over time that it provides, but generally speaking, Elemental Weapon is going to be a little bit stronger than Swallow Soul. Moving on to our back bar, we have Degeneration, Consuming Trap, Unstable Wall of Fire, Siphoning Attacks, and Barbed Trap. Now, if you're not able to be within melee range to use Barbed Traps, you have two options for your source of minor force. First one is going to be, again, from the Sigil Order line, going to be Challenge Acceleration. This is the typical go-to for Magicka DPS. However, if you don't have access to the Sigil Order line, there is another option, and that is the other morph of Trap Beast, Light Waste Beast Trap. They did up the duration up to 10 seconds, so it is a little bit more forgiving on your stamina pool. However, you do need to aim it fairly decently well because it only has a 2.5 meter radius, so that's a pretty small radius. But in a pinch, if you're not able to use Barbed Trap, Lightweight Beast Trap is a potential option, so that way you still get that additional minor force. Moving on to our champion points. CP cap is still 810, so you can put 270 points in each of our different constellation types. For our green CPs, we have 100 into Arcanus, 75 into Tenacity, which leaves an additional 95 points to put wherever you would like. I have 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord. Now, if you're not heavy attacking that often because you find that you're able to sustain pretty decently well, you can shift some points out of Tenacity if you'd like. I would definitely try to maintain 100 points into Arcanus though. You do want to have as much magic regen as you can just to give you a little bit of additional buffer room for sustain. For our blue CPs, I do want to kind of point out here that the spell erosions that I have here, 12 points, that is assuming that we have all of our possible debuffs active. So that's Infused Torch Crusher, Alkosh, Minor Breach, so on and so forth. If you do not have any of those debuffs, or you anticipate having lower than average debuff times, then you might want to shift some points out of these nodes and put them into spell erosion to make up for the loss in penetration. For Elfborn, I have 61, you can drop this down to 56. Elemental Expert, I have at 64. You can also drop this down to 56, or even as far down as 49. We have 13 in the Staff Expert, which can be dropped down to 9. Master at Arms at 72, which can be dropped down to 61 or 66. And then 48 into Thaumaturge, which can be dropped down to 44 or 40. So just gave you guys a couple of jump point options if you do need to put some points into Spell Erosion. Finally, our red CPs, the kind of setup that I have here is a very balanced approach to overall mitigation. I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick-Skinned, and 64 in both Hardy and Elemental Defender. So that's pretty much it for the build stuff. Now let's go ahead and talk about our overall rotation. One thing I do want to point out is if you do want to run a shield, you can give up Crippling Grasp or Flame Reach for a shield on your front bar if you feel like you need the shield. So generally speaking, the rotation basis, the kind of theory behind the rotation is still pretty much remain exactly the same, even though we are running quite a few more dots now than we have in the past year. So it's still going to be centered around the bow proc from Merciless Resolve. So it's once you get the bow active, you just want to shoot that off as quickly as you can and then go back to maintaining your rotation. General idea is to maintain all of your dots and then just use Swallow Soul as a spamble in between trying to maintain your dots. Most important dot to maintain are going to be the ones on your back bar because 1 damage and 2 utility. The Unstable Wall for the Maelstrom bonus, Barbed Trap for the Minor Force bonus. Soul Trap and Degeneration are both very strong dots. Degeneration also has an additional effect of giving you additional 100 Magicka back every time you use a light or heavy attack. That helps out your overall sort of sustain. And then because we're using Blue Food, we do want to try to maintain Siphoning attacks for the additional sustain. We don't want to necessarily lose out on too much sustain by dropping Siphoning attacks for too long. But the other two abilities on the front bar here, Crippling Grasp and Flame Reach, they are of a lower priority because they don't do quite as much damage here. And so if you do need to kind of give up a little bit of uptime on these dots in order to maintain your front back bar dots, then by all means go ahead and do so. Just try to get that bow proc off pretty much as quickly as you can. So general rotation would probably look something like this. You always want to pre-buff and start by laying all of your back bar dots here. Now a little bit early there. You can see here that I do have an add-on that gives me a timer on trap on my bow proc. So once I hit 4, I do light attack and then I shoot the bow proc off. I don't do light attack, wait for the 5 to hit, light attack again, and then bow proc. It is light attack, 5th hit, bow proc right away, and then you go back into your overall weaving rotation there. So I still have a little bit of lag here on the PTS, as you guys kind of saw there from the janky animations. So as we do this 21 million dummy parse, just keep that in mind. That's probably going to be why you might see me cast Merciless Resolve again rather than use the bow proc. That should have gone off, mainly because of that additional lag here. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and do a 20 million dummy parse. Again, the lag is going to reduce my DPS a little bit here, but hopefully not too much. All of my parses are going to be affected by the same sort of lag RNG factor here, so it should still be comparable to other Magicka DPS. So let's go ahead and get started here with our 21 million dummy parse, so you guys get an idea of what you're able to pull in a raid. So one thing to keep in mind is that for some, I have no idea reason, there is a cast time on Soul Harvest now. You can see that with the cast bar that shows up when I use Soul Harvest. There's like a, I think it's like a 700 millisecond cast time associated with it now, which is very strange. And it can definitely mess up your overall rotation too. See here, if you need to re-up dots, those take priority over spamming your Swallow Soul. At this point, see here, I did have to use a heavy attack here. God damn it. Tricky thing is, it seems like my combat metrics has bugged out, so I actually don't know how well I'm doing compared to my previous parses. So in execute here, we are in execute now. You're going to drop all your front guard dots. You will still use your ultimate and your bow drop as they go off. And you will still try to maintain all of your back guard dots as well. It's up to you if you want to maintain siphoning attacks or not. Some people like to do it. Okay, so yeah, so that was actually a little bit lower than what I'm actually used to pulling. About 2k lower, 2 or 3k lower than what I'm used to pulling. To show you guys this parse though, so I pulled about 80.9k. Again, this is about 2k to 3k lower than what I have pulled in the past, just working on rotation. Part of it's a little bit of probably crit RNG. Yeah, so a lot of it is crit RNG actually, because I only got 57% of my impales were crits. But another part was probably just sort of the lag factor here and kind of messing up my rotation here and there as I'm trying to kind of adjust for the lag. But you can see here that Magicka Nightblade's not doing really all that great here. Again, this parse is not my best. I've managed to pull upwards of 83k, almost 84k when I was trying to test out different builds here. But the lag and also the fact that I screwed up the rotation quite a few times kind of offset that a little bit here. But generally speaking, Magicka Nightblades haven't been quite as good as they have been in the past. But again, that self-heal from Swallow Soul is actually really nice for progression. So I would still consider it to be a pretty viable DPS class, especially for progression, especially due to the fact that it has that self-heal. Definitely a hard class to master, so it's up to you whether you want to kind of master the Magicka Nightblade. It can always come back as the strongest Magicka DPS later on down the line, depending on how Zos balance things out. So if you still main a Magicka Nightblade, I would still say hold on to it. You're still able to obviously clear all the content in the game with it, and it might make a resurgence in a future patch. So that is it for this video. Hope you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions about the build, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Again, hope you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.